Hi, Ken Stomsky along with Kathy Palmer, and we're here to talk about haunted Westfield.
We are, Ken. You know, I think it's very interesting. We don't need to just be talking about haunting at this time of year because the ghosts don't recognize Halloween. They're there all year long. They don't just wait for the end of October to go, boo, I got you.
Why do we wait until the end of October, though?
That's a really good question. We wait because it's a traditional holiday to celebrate these kinds of things that happen all the time. You'd be surprised to know, or maybe you wouldn't, that when people are asked about whether or not they believe, ooh, do you know that almost half the people asked do believe in some kind of haunting or spiritual event? Now, haven't you ever been in bed at night? Everything's quiet. You're almost sound asleep. And very suddenly, you hear a bang or a crash, and you don't know what it is. Now, if you lived in my house, it would be the cat jumping off the bed, so I'd pay no attention to noises. But there are some instances where people hear the same bang or the same noise, and they can't identify what it is.
Could it be a voice, too?
It could be a voice, and I'm going to share that with you a little bit later when I talk about voices. Oh, wait, no, that's another show altogether. Well, anyway, the first building I want to talk about, and all of these buildings, by the way, folks, are right here in Westfield. And you might know of some of these stories. I personally know of at least 2 of my friends who have purported to live in homes that maybe have someone else still living there with them. One of those is a friend that you and I share, and he was just here a while ago.
Oh, that's an old house.
It is a very old house.
Does it help that some of these places might be older?
You know, that's a good question. The first place I'm going to talk about is a building that now houses Santiago's, but years and years ago, it was housing Rod's Variety.
That was a variety store.
Yes.
Yeah, in the 80s.
Yes,
yeah.
Even before then, even in the 50s and 60s. Now, I'm going to guess, I don't have an exact date for the building of the house, or the building, but I'm going to guess it came about somewhere in the middle of the 1800s. And the reason I say this, folks, is that Westfield originally started on Main Street. That area around Main Street and Meadow Street was one of the original Westfield villages. There were actually 3 settlements, but that's the original. There was also, by the way, we think, but we don't know, we think it also is the site where there was an original Native American fort. So we were starting on Main Street, but then the canal came through, the railroad came through, and that's what moved businesses down to Elm Street. So Elm Street became the main street of Westfield. So those buildings on the Elm Street, Franklin Avenue, those came about in about the middle 1800s. So I'm going to guess that that's when this building came about. The stories I heard from this building are stories that I actually got from family members who lived there. And a couple of my friends are related to the original owners, and they said that they remember being told about noises and sounds and strange shadows. They were always told, don't go upstairs. The fun part about this
it's always upstairs or the basement, right?
Yes, don't go in the basement because you know what's down there. Again, in my house, it's the cat. But they were told, don't go. And the fun part about this particular picture, I don't know if it's going to show up that well, and I would like to credit where the picture came from, but honestly, I don't remember. I'm going to guess that all of these pictures are somewhere available at the Westfield Athenaeum because they do have a wide variety. So if you're interested in doing more, you would ask them. Unfortunately, it's not accessible now because of COVID. But in this picture, there was some fog around the 3rd floor. And my friend who lived there said, Kathy, it's interesting that the fog is around the 3rd floor because that's where we were told most of the hauntings were taking place. Good sound effects. So that's the first building. Do you have any questions about that building? Whether it's still there? I'm thinking they probably moved along. What was there before the building? I can't answer that. I'm going to say nothing. There were probably no houses there before this building came into being. I don't really know. So if you have any questions or anybody knows what building we're talking about, by all means, share any stories with me if you know them. So the next building I'm going to move into, and people are very familiar with this if you've lived in Westfield all your life. This was called the Shirtless Mission. Now, the Shirtless Mission was right over here next to the tennis courts. There was a building there. Before the mission was built, there was a farmhouse. And before the farmhouse, there really was nothing. So Reverend David Shirtless was from Blandford, and he decided later in life to become a minister. He originally was a farmer, then he was a storekeeper, but then later on he decided to be a minister, and he was very interested in caring for children. So in about the middle of the 1890s, he purchased this property, and he built what was a home for destitute children. People say, oh, yes, 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 that was the orphanage. It was not an orphanage, Ken. You know, in those days, we really didn't have a lot of networking for families who were destitute. And it wasn't unusual, sad to say, but if you had no family and your wife died and you were working, you couldn't take care of your children.
Right, yeah.
So you actually sent your children to some place like the Shirtless Mission. If the husband died and the wife couldn't take care of her children, again, she might put them in the Shirtless Mission.
How does that differ from an orphanage?
Well, if you're in an orphanage, you have no parents. But these were, sometimes it was both the mother and the father that brought you there and left you at the mission. You might live there until you aged out at 16, or you might have only stayed for a little while until your parents, until their position got better.
Is it possible any of these children might have been challenged back then?
It's possible, but not necessary. They went to Westfield schools. We have people today that remember going to Franklin Avenue with these children. They were in the public. The home actually operated from 1900 to 1962. So there are still adults living that grew up in this particular home. And it was the best they had at the time. So after it ceased being the Shirtless Mission, it was then bought out and became the Barnard Rest Home. And that's where the interesting things began to happen.
Okay, do tell.
There was a nurse who was sent up to the 3rd floor to do something. Again, it's always
upstairs. 3rd floor again.
And she came running back downstairs and she said, I'm never going up there again. And they said, well, why not? She said, I'm not going up there alone. There's somebody up there that's touching me, that's pulling my hair, that's running by me. And of course, there were no children there. And now after that, there were even residents that complained that were living in the rest home. And they complained that, why are the visitors here bringing their children into this nursing home and letting them run all around and up and down the stairs and bothering me when I'm napping?
Did something happen to any of these children there?
Not that I'm aware of.
Interesting.
But there may be children that were still there long after it turned into a rest home. And many times footsteps, children running up and down the stairs were heard, and laughter was heard. And people had this sense that something was brushing by. Now, the Shirtless Mission is long gone. I believe the rest home I want to say it closed in 1972, but I'm not sure of the date. But it has since been torn down. There are still pictures. You can Google the information and you can still find pictures on the internet. There is a new building there. There are condominiums. Now, if you do any reading about ghosts and hauntings, and there are many things that maybe precipitate the haunting. It may be, and listen, these are all theories, folks. These are just fun to listen to. They are theories. I'm not attesting to having witnessed this. I have more that I can attest to.
Well, that's why we're here.
That will be in the end, the very end. But they might tell you that perhaps it's someone, it might have been their happy place. They come back because maybe it's where they were the happiest, or maybe they were the saddest, or you never really, do we know? No, we don't know. But it's not necessarily the building, but the spot. So it would be interesting to know if now that the building is gone, are they still feeling anything in that spot over there?
We may never know.
We may never know, and they may never know. They may think that banging door is strictly the wind. But is it? You don't know. So the Barnard Rest Home, the Shirtless Mission, by the way, is still active. They still have a fund that supports children's needs in the city of Westfield.
They actually helped out with the drive-in movie for
I'm sure they did.
wow.
Yep. So that started in 1900. The next one, I did not have firsthand experience, but a very good friend of mine had the first-hand experience, and this is the Cranes Mill. We called it Cranes Mill. We called it Strathmore. It's the mill up on Granville Road by Horton's Bridge that is now a condominium. Cranes Mill started in about 1838. They were making papers, and they were making very high-end papers. They were making linen papers, very expensive papers. They sold out to Stevens Paper Mill, and Stevens Paper Mill again operated, I believe, until about the 1970s. And then they have the lower mill, and that's a lot of offices and businesses, and the upper mill is all condominiums. Well, one of my very good friends, and I really would trust her word.
I think this is a friend that I may know as well.
Well, this particular friend often gets confused with me. Can I say her first name? And that would be Carol, my friend Carol. So I'm going to attribute all of this story to my friend Carol.
Kanani.
Yes, you got it. Yes. And if you know her, you would believe what she says. She lives in the apartment, and when you think about a paper mill and all of the industrial accidents over the past that they may have been witness to, because that's another purported reason for a haunting, is they've had some really cataclysmic event that's happened and it's keeping their coming back. Well, she was sitting home in her condo, and a man walked in, and she assumed it was her husband and didn't pay a lot of attention until, I don't know if she said something and he didn't answer, or she went to look. But she very distinctly saw a man dressed in some kind of worker's outfit walk through her condo into her closet. And she said, I saw it as clearly as I'm looking at you. You're not going to disappear, are you? Please don't disappear on me, because that will really frighten me.
And our friend actually saw that.
She actually saw this happen in her condominium.
I know that she's of sound mind.
I don't know that because of the circle of people I hang around with. So, yes.
I can see her actually witnessing that.
I would absolutely.
Yeah. I would trust that.
I would absolutely take her word.
Yeah.
So is there something in the condos? Is it someone who worked at the mill? Did he work there 150 years ago? Was it a good job and he still wants to stay there?
Was it a one-time thing?
I don't believe it was. I believe that she has had other experiences but I think that this one was probably the most jarring one. I would be a little jarred if I was sitting home alone and somebody walked in front of me into a closet. You know, it's one thing if you see them walking outside into a door, but you're going into a closet.
Right.
And of course, yes, she opened the door.
I would take
and
pause
no,
with
there
something
was no
like
one
that.
there.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting, and it makes a lot of sense. When you're talking about hauntings or some kind of, we use the word paranormal. Paranormal doesn't just mean ghostly things. It just means that it isn't normal. We don't know the answer. There may be an answer. There may be a reason. There are a lot of theories, but that's what really paranormal means. It means we can't explain it. The next one is Pine Hill Cemetery.
I've heard of that one.
Do you think cemeteries are haunted? What do you think?
I think, actually, I know that I've been told by people who run paranormal investigations that cemeteries usually are not
Correct.
the most haunted places.
And why is that? Do you know why?
I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Well, I can tell you that answer. Usually they say they're not because by the time that the body is brought to the cemetery, and this is silly, they're dead. They've never been there before. So keeping in mind that spirits, and I use the word supposedly, again, don't know, but keeping in mind that they're attached to a place or a person, and there really wouldn't be an emotional reason for them to be attached to a particular cemetery.
Right.
That being said, though, the theories are they're attached to the people who come to visit them at the cemetery. So if I go, say, to a loved one's grave, they may be trying to get in touch with me that way.
Mm-hmm.
Or they may have felt that something very bad has been done to them and they are looking for where it was done. Again, I don't know. But there's a lot of stories about Pine Hill, and they seem to more or less be on the back side of the hill. Now, if you go into Pine Hill...
Are we talking about the King Street side here?
Yes.
Okay.
The back side. Now, keep in mind, and I want to mention this for those of you who are interested in these kind of experiences, the cemetery is closed at night. It is not open to the public, and you may not enter at night. You would be trespassing, so please don't do it and respect the cemetery. And when you are in there, respect the cemetery in general. Pine Hill Cemetery is a wonderful example of the Victorian garden cemeteries. If you think about, for those of you who are familiar with the old burying ground in
Mechanic Street.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You notice that it's very austere. It's very solemn. That the epitaphs on the grave are very frightening. You know, live well because you're going to end up here just like me, pal. It's sort of...
See you soon.
Yeah, it's that kind of evil message. And it's meant to be that way because the original inhabitants or the original people in Westfield, the Puritans had this very somber, serious attitude about death.
They were serious about everything.
Yes, they were. Repent now, or you will end up. In the Victorian age, we changed that attitude a little bit. It became more romanticized. It became a little bit softer. And you'll notice that in the cemeteries. Actually, the Victorian cemeteries were our precursors of parks. So it wasn't unusual to see families on a Sunday bringing their picnic lunch to their ancestors' grave and eating their lunch. And
that was a common pastime.
It was.
Even 50, 60 years ago, wasn't it?
It was. They would play games there. They would walk there. They had no other place but the cemetery. So you'll notice when you look at Pine Hill how beautifully landscaped. It's terraced, and it's landscaped, and it has lovely bushes and trees. And that's the reason. Now, Pine Hill came to be in about 1840s when the old burying ground became too crowded. So then we opened Pine Hill. And Pine Hill, I did find an interesting, totally abstract fact that the hill, Court Street, at one time was almost a perpendicular hill. If you look at the backside of Pine Hill that goes down so abruptly, that's what the front side was. And it took them a long time to grade it off so you could travel it. So if you enter through the main gates and you go towards the back of the cemetery and then go a little bit to the right, I believe it's the Nobles. Well, I say Noble, they were everywhere, so never mind that.
Right.
But if you go to that back corner, there's a concrete stairway going down to the back side, to the King Street side. And you know what, Ken? First of all, you have to look for it. It's not that visible. It's very dark. It's very isolated, and you do get the heebie-jeebies going down those stairs. Now, maybe it's just the power of suggestion. Maybe it's just the dark and the woods surrounding me. But it's creepy. You get chills on your back walking down those stairs. And the other creepy thing about it is the land to the left is overgrown woods. But there's graves in there. There's graves in the side of the hill hidden in the woods. And it's just an ominous feeling to it. There are many stories. There are stories of people going in there and hearing a man's voice. And it's not a very friendly voice. It's a very threatening voice. And people say they get the feeling that they want them to leave, that he wants them out. There are many stories about rocks being thrown at them. And there are stories about being touched, the feeling that they're being followed, the feeling that they're hearing things. And again, it's mostly out on the back side. And you had an important fact about that, the back side, the King Street side.
It is believed that those who were indigent had no family to inter them. That's where they were put.
And that may be true.
Pauper's Point, I believe they called that section.
Interesting. And you may have a point there, which might give you another reason of why there's so much sadness there. The other very sad thing out on that back side is all of the newborns who have passed are buried there. There's a lovely, lovely monument back there to newborn children. So if you imagine the amount of sadness that you find on that back part of the hill. There's a great story I found, though, about Pine Hills. Great story. True story. True story. One of the caretakers noticed when he was making his rounds after dark that there was one gravestone that would actually glow.
I've heard of that one.
Ominous golden light. And then as he passed it again, the light would be gone. And then the next night, again, there would be this ominous light on the tombstone. And that happened several times. And it got so that he didn't really want to walk by this tombstone, but he had to because it was on his tour.
Right.
Well, folks, it turns out that the moon was reflecting off of the tombstone. And of course, as the moon would move, the reflection would come up and the reflection would
I wasn't sure if you were going to ruin that story by mentioning that or not.
I've ruined the story.
Yeah.
Which is a good story because it points out when you do hear these things and you do have these experiences, there may be, I will bet you 99% of the time, there are reasons for it happening. And that would be one. But there are people who don't like going into Pine Hill Cemetery. It's closed at dusk, I believe. So please don't go in there. Please don't. It is trespassing. And we do want to honor them. But And again, people that live next door to it, some people say they feel uncomfortable. Some people say they've never had anything. So who knows? There was one story I ran across about a young couple who was in the parking lot on the upper campus here, because we're right across the street.
Right.
They were in that parking lot, and they had stones thrown at their vehicle.
Mm-hmm. And this would be the parking lot at the corner of Smith and King.
Yep, the upper lot. Back then, when this happened, it was the older high school. Mm-hmm. But they actually had stones, and they got out of the car and looked around, thinking it was a friend of theirs or somebody being funny, and they couldn't find anyone. Mm-hmm. Which isn't to say somebody didn't duck down. We never know. But Pine Hill, do they have, well, I do know they have a lot of spirits. Mm-hmm. But whether they're still walking around there, I don't know.
And Pine Hill is just one of several places in haunted Westfield. I'm sure there's some more.
We do. We have, and another one, this goes back to my friend that we previously mentioned, although I've heard this from several people. And that's the picture of the building you're going to see you might not recognize. This is the Taylor Mansion. Now, the Taylor Mansion was built in Westfield from 1896 to 1898. Taylor was, I believe, tobacco, a lot of money in tobacco. At the time this house was built, it was the second most expensive house in the city of Westfield. Over its time, it became the Knights of Columbus, and then it eventually became the original part of the Westfield YMCA. No, I'm not going to break into the song and dance, but it was the YMCA. Have you ever been in the older section of the
mansion? Yes.
It is absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. You can understand that it would have been the most expensive house. But there are stories, and again, I've heard these from different people, but I've also heard it from Carol, that there is a lady seen upstairs in the window. Now, I think the upstairs room in the front was at one time a ballroom. I'm not sure. But they say that they see this lady up there, and they also see her on the stairs, and that's where the nursery school is, I think, now. But they also see her. She's been seen in several places. Mm-hmm. Would it be one of the Taylor ancestors? Was that the home she absolutely loved? Or could it be somebody left from the Knights of Columbus?
Now, speaking of ancestors and Taylors, do you know if there's any relationship between those Taylors and going back to the early Westfield with Reverend Taylor?
You know, that's a good question. I will look that up. Reverend Taylor would have been 150 years earlier. And I
just curious if they're the descendants that went on. Yeah,
they may very well be.
There were a lot of them.
There were a lot of Taylors. He had many children. He was married twice, and he had many children out of each one of his wives. Some of them went on to be ministers, so that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I will look that up, and I will let you know. But the hauntings in Westfield, so if you go by the Westfield Y, it's kind of hard to see now because it's set back, and the new building cuts a lot of it off. But look up in that second floor. See if you're noticing a shadow that you don't think should be there. Mm-hmm. It just might be her, whoever she is. Ooh. Now, I fibbed a little bit, just a tiny bit, when I said that these were not my firsthand experiences. And again, I do have friends. One of my friends that we mentioned earlier lives in a very old house in Westfield. It was built in, we think, around 1770 maybe. We're not exactly sure. And he claims that they have heard children playing games upstairs in the attic again. Now we think of
and
attic.
It's always the attic.
Yes, but now let me tell you something. You know, Ken, we think of attics now as a place that we store things. But in colonial homes, that wasn't true.
Oh, my house, which was built in 1918 even, you could see the wear and tear on the stairs going up to the attic in my home. You know people were living there.
They did. They
Yeah.
used it to store their vegetables in the winter. They used it to store their meat because it was cooler. Children played upstairs all the time in the rainy days. So there was a lot going on in the attics. And that might be the reason. But I know that my friends who live in this particular house, and because I'm not comfortable if he wants to divulge it on camera, he can. But I don't like to do that. They claim they've heard children running and playing games. And he also claimed that he heard a voice saying, "I think we're alone now." And now I'm going to have that song going through my head forever and ever.
Tiffany?
Yes. Anyway, and I know of people. I know I had a friend who had a home on the north side of town, and she was talking to her husband, and they were having a conversation. She was getting ready for bed, and he came upstairs, and she was talking to him, and then she looked, and it wasn't him, and it just disappeared. Now, again, this person was a teacher. I have to go for their word. I don't know. However, this last building, of course, is one of my favorites.
So you're saving the best for last here,
I
you
am
think?
saving the best for last.
Okay.
This is the Westfield Women's Club. The Westfield Women's Club was built, I'm not sure again of the year, 1926 or 1927. And remember we said that sometimes they're attached to the property, not necessarily the building. But before the Westfield Women's Club, there was nothing there. It was actually the front lawn to the Medical Arts building next door. That was the Honorable William Bates House. And when he built that, the front of his house actually faces Holland Avenue, not Court Street. So the entrance to his house, all the porticos face Holland Avenue. And where the Women's Club is now was the front lawn. But I have several firsthand stories, and some of them are actually my own that I actually witnessed. Now, again, if you want to talk about sound mind, I'm not going to attest to anything, but I know for a fact these issues have happened. It was a June night, and we were leaving the building. We had auditions for the Christmas musical, and we're walking out the door. And I'm on the steps. My friend Marion was locking the door, and we do that very carefully. She was shutting the door, and she stopped dead, and she said, "Somebody's in there playing the piano." Now, our piano is kept closed and covered, and there's a very heavy canvas cover on it. So it's not as if a mouse got in there or a squirrel got in there and ran across the keys. But she very clearly heard it. She's not the only one. One night, a friend of ours who was doing it, well, you'll understand this, setting the lights, programming the light board for the show, was upstairs in the lighting booth, and that's up on the third floor, I guess.
Again, yep.
Again, they always go upstairs. He was setting it. Now, when we're alone in the building, we usually don't leave the door unlocked because it's nighttime and, people come and go. So he had the door locked. And again, he very clearly heard the piano playing. And he assumed, well, somebody maybe came in to try their music. Went downstairs, nobody there, door locked. And this is someone that I would take his word for it. Now, some of the stories I've heard from there, I don't. I think, yeah, okay, yeah, you really saw that. I had a friend of mine who thought she saw a shadow, and it does make sense. And when Rob Goff, who we're having on shortly, did his paranormal investigation there, this makes sense with what he said. She was on the stage, and she looked up, and in the balcony on stage left, house right, she saw a very dark shadow that should not have been there. We had a mother whose child was in one of our shows, and she would come to every show, and she always sat in the balcony, stage left, house right. And she said to me, you know, someone keeps tapping me on the shoulder in that same spot where the shadow was seen. Now, again, she was there every night, and it happened more than once. And this is a mom. She has no reason to make that story up. Why would she, out of the blue, come and tell me that?
Right.
So, is it there? I don't know. I was downstairs on the lower level at a meeting. It was dark out. I was
Lower level, so
there's a basement.
Basement.
This time it's
Basement.
basement. Yes, we're back in the basement. And I was sitting at the very end table. There was no one to my left. There's nobody there. It's the kitchen. And I very clearly as I hear you, I very clearly heard someone say, and I'm not sure what it was because it happened so quickly, they either said hi or hello directly in my ear. Now, we have vents in the building that if I'm downstairs and I say something and you're upstairs, it will sound like I'm standing right next to you. So my assumption was, well, there must be someone upstairs. And I'm thinking, but why would there be anybody upstairs? So I left the meeting. The meeting went on. Nobody knew what I was doing, but they don't know anyway. So I got up and I went upstairs and the lights were off. I turned the lights on. There was no one there. Gets even better. I was sitting on the floor, not on the floor, but by floor I mean I was sitting in a chair out in the audience listening to a presentation. And the man giving the presentation was in front of the stage on the floor. He was not up on the floor. I'm on the stage. He was not there. And I was fairly close. I was maybe only 20 feet away from the thrust. The thrust being the larger part of the stage that comes out like a platform. And I very distinctly heard footsteps walking across the thrust. Now here's the kicker. A friend of mine was sitting in the row in front of me, and she's an adult. When I heard those footsteps, she turned to her brother at exactly the same time and said, "Did you just hear those footsteps on the stage?" So
and there was nobody walking on the stage.
There's nobody on the stage. She said she heard them go across and up the stairs into that same spot on the balcony. We often hear bangs. There's a banging noise. I don't know what it is. I was there with a friend of mine one day, and we're standing there. We're the only two in the building, and we heard this bang. And he went everywhere. It's coming from above the stage. There's nothing there. It's like looking up at the ceiling.
You don't even have a true catwalk there, do you?
No, but we have a pin rail over on stage left. So he did go up in the pin rail and look. And there's a trap door to the ceiling. He went up and checked the trap door. We were thinking, well, did the wind? He said, "Kathy, that trap door can't budge." He said, "I'm shoving it and it won't move." And we've heard the bangs several times. I've been in, I don't go in the building by myself. I stay. I do not. My friends love to try to run out the door and leave me there. They're so mean to me.
So that must have been really trying then at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic when we had to film there for some of your stories. You had to wait for me alone.
Yes, I don't like it. And when I'm waiting alone, I do constantly hear noises. I was there one night before rehearsal because I was trying to work out some of the blocking and I need to see it. And something dropped backstage. And where it dropped, I went and looked and there was nothing there. And again, I could be wrong. It could just be the noise and something was ready to fall. We frequently come in and find lights moved. You know, a light that we had focused on center stage, all of a sudden is stage left.
Mm-hmm.
We've had lights go on and off inexplicably, and maybe you could explain that.
Well, I've seen the electrical wires there, so
Could be.
yeah, to each their own.
we've seen them go off and then come back on for no reason. But you know, you have Rob coming in, and he can tell you a little bit more about what he found there.
Mm-hmm.
He did find some very interesting things, and I don't want to rain on his parade, but I don't know, Ken. It made a believer out of me.
Mm-hmm. And this will be playing all through the month, and the show next week on Ken's Den, where Rob Goff will be coming in, that can be played back as well. So, no, regardless of what he decides to share with us, you folks will be able to watch it.
He does have two really good pieces of information that will support particularly one of the stories that I told you.
Mm-hmm.
But I will leave you, before we end, I'm going to share, I don't know if this is a ghost story. It is definitely paranormal, and this is absolutely true. And this is an experience that I personally had. Now again, whether I believe this or not, I don't know. My school of thought is very much out. I do think there are things that happen that we can't explain. It doesn't mean there isn't an explanation, but I do think there are things that go bump in the night, and we don't know what it is. Maybe I
Except for cats.
Except for the cats.
Yes.
Anyway, several years ago, I had a very, very dear friend of mine who passed away at a relatively young age from cancer. He was only in his 40s. And one of his last requests was that I sing at his funeral in Blessed Sacrament. I used to sing at funerals back then. And I said no. I said, I just couldn't do it. I was too emotionally involved with him, and I wouldn't be able to get through it. And he had a real thing. He loved those tacky pink flamingos. Oh my God. He had flamingos on his clothes. He gave us flamingo presents. He was hilarious with his flamingos. So the mother said, Kathy, you really have to do this. It was one of his last requests, make sure Kathy sings for me. So under duress, I agreed to do it. We got through the service. We went back to the mother's house for some coffee and some snacks. And I was sitting there and I said, this is totally random. I need to go buy some sunglasses. And everybody looked at me like,
What?
What? I need to go buy sunglasses. And I had no idea why, but I just had to go buy the sunglasses. And my girlfriend said, my friend who was there said, you can go later. And my husband said, you don't need sunglasses, you've got some. And I said, no, I need to go buy sunglasses. I'll be right back. So I left. And I went up to what was then, it wasn't Ocean State, but it's in that area somewhere, and I bought my sunglasses, and I went to leave, and the woman said to me, here, you need to put those in a bag. I said, no, I don't want the bag, I'm going to wear them. She said, no, you need the bag. I said, I don't want the bag, and I put them on. I said, I'm wearing them. She literally chased me out the door and handed me the bag. You need this bag.
At that store?
At that store.
Which, dare I say, it might have been Ames?
No, I don't think it was Ames. I think it was, there's still one over in West Springfield. It's one of those where they buy out job lot. I think it was, no, anyway, it doesn't. It's an academic. You have to have this bag. And I took the bag, and I still have it. There was a pink flamingo with the words, thank you, on the bag. And that absolutely is a true story.
Somebody may have had a sense of humor.
I have no idea. First of all, I don't know why I felt I needed to go get the sunglasses. I didn't want to sing. And he loved pink flamingos. I don't know. But those are my tales of haunted Westfield. There are probably more haunted stories, and I'm sure there are more people around town who think they have seen something, so they can always let us know. They can always text us or let us know if they've seen something, and maybe we could share it at another time.
I want to thank you for tuning into Stories of Haunted Westfield. On behalf of Kathy Palmer, I'm Ken Stomsky. Thanks for tuning in.